What happens when Hollywood's biggest A-lister walks into the lion's den of daytime television? You won't believe what unfolds when Brad Pitt sits down with The View's most controversial hosts in what started as a routine promotional interview, but quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in live television history. The cameras kept rolling as tempers flared, accusations flew, and what was supposed to be a friendly chat about his latest film turned into a battlefield of opposing ideologies that left viewers stunned and the entertainment world buzzing. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these five hosts decide to ambush one of Hollywood's most beloved stars in what can only be described as a calculated attack that went horribly wrong. The tension was palpable from the moment Brad Pitt walked onto the View set. What should have been a standard promotional appearance for his latest environmental documentary quickly revealed itself to be something far more sinister. The hosts, led by their most aggressive panelist, had clearly done their homework and come prepared for war rather than conversation. "Welcome back to The View, everyone," the lead host announced with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're here with Brad Pitt, who's promoting his new documentary about climate change. But Brad, before we talk about your film, we really need to address some of the comments you made last week about Hollywood's responsibility in political discourse." Pitt shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly caught off guard. "I'm sorry, what comments are you referring to? I thought we were here to discuss the environmental crisis and the documentary." "Oh, come on, Brad," another host interjected, her voice dripping with condescension. "You can't seriously sit there and pretend you didn't say that celebrities should stay out of politics. That's pretty rich coming from someone who's been politically active for decades." "I never said celebrities should stay out of politics," Pitt replied, his voice remaining calm but with an edge of confusion. "I said that we should be more thoughtful about how we use our platforms and make sure we're actually informed before we speak on complex issues." The third host leaned forward aggressively. "So you're saying that those of us who have been speaking out against injustice and using our voices for change are somehow uninformed? That's incredibly condescending, Brad." "That's not what I said at all," Pitt responded, his jaw tightening slightly. "I was speaking generally about the importance of being educated on issues before taking public positions. I wasn't targeting anyone specifically." But the hosts weren't backing down. The fourth panelist, known for her particularly aggressive interviewing style, jumped in with both feet. "Let's be honest here, Brad. You've been pretty quiet on a lot of issues that matter to people. Your privilege allows you to pick and choose your battles while the rest of us have to live with the consequences of political decisions every single day." "My privilege?" Pitt's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composed demeanor. "I've been involved in humanitarian work for over 2 decades. I've built homes for hurricane victims, worked on sustainable housing projects, and used my platform to raise awareness about environmental issues. How is that picking and choosing battles?" "But you stayed silent during the election," the lead host pressed. "You didn't endorse anyone. You didn't use your massive influence to help people understand what was at stake. That's a luxury that people like us don't have." Pitt took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. "I made a conscious decision to focus on issues rather than partisan politics. I believe in bringing people together to solve problems, not dividing them further." "Bringing people together?" The second host laughed bitterly. "That's such a privileged white male perspective, Brad. Some of us don't have the luxury of being neutral when our rights are under attack." The audience could feel the temperature in the room rising as Pitt's knuckles whitened where he gripped the armrest of his chair. "I'm not neutral on human rights. I'm not neutral on environmental protection. I'm not neutral on social justice. I just choose to approach these issues differently than you do." "Differently how?" the third host demanded. "By staying silent when it matters most. By sitting on the sidelines while the rest of us do the heavy lifting." "I don't sit on the sidelines," Pitt replied, his voice growing harder. "I work behind the scenes. I donate. I build. I act. I just don't feel the need to broadcast every single thing I do for social media points." The fifth host, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "That sounds like you're criticizing those of us who do use social media to raise awareness. Are you saying we're just doing it for points?" "I'm saying that meaningful change happens through sustained action, not just public statements." Pitt shot back, his patience clearly wearing thin. Sustained action? The lead host's voice turned mocking. Like what? Making movies? That's not action, Brad. That's entertainment. Actually, it is action when those movies raise awareness about important issues, Pitt replied firmly. When? They start conversations that lead to policy changes. When they inspire people to get involved. Or when they make you millions of dollars while you pat yourself on the back for being socially conscious, the second host added with a sneer. The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of that accusation hung in the air. Pitt's eyes flashed with something dangerous, and viewers could see him struggling to maintain his composure as the hosts continued their coordinated attack. I think we need to move on, Pitt said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. This isn't what I agreed to discuss today. But this is what people need to hear, the third host insisted. They need to understand that your version of activism is just another form of privilege. You get to choose when and how you engage because you don't face the same consequences as the rest of us. The same consequences. Pitt's voice was barely above a whisper now, but it carried the weight of years of frustration. Do you want to talk about consequences? Let's talk about the death threats I've received for supporting environmental causes. Let's talk about the boycotts of my films. Let's talk about the impact on my family when I take public positions. But the hosts weren't listening. They had drawn blood, and they could sense victory. The fourth host leaned in for what she clearly thought would be the killing blow, setting the stage for an escalation that would change everything about this already explosive confrontation. Let's talk about your ex-wife, she said with a predatory smile. Angelina Jolie has been far more vocal about humanitarian issues than you ever have. She's been a UN Goodwill ambassador. She's spoken out on women's rights, refugee crises, and social justice. Meanwhile, you've been focused on your career and your image. Don't you think that says something about your priorities? The mention of his ex-wife hit like a physical blow. Pitt's entire body tensed, and for the first time in the interview, genuine anger flashed across his face. My personal life is off limits, he said through gritted teeth. We agreed that this interview would focus on the documentary. But your personal life is relevant here. The lead host pressed, sensing they had found his breaking point. It shows a pattern of behavior. Even in your marriage, she was the one doing the real activist work while you were making blockbuster movies. You don't know anything about my marriage, Pitt snapped, his voice rising for the first time. You don't know what conversations we had privately, what work I supported behind the scenes, or what decisions we made together. The second host jumped in, her voice cutting like a blade. What we know is what the public sees, Brad. And what the public sees is a man who talks a good game, but lets others do the heavy lifting. Even your own wife. Former wife, Pitt corrected sharply. And I'm not going to sit here and let you turn this into some kind of character assassination based on tabloid speculation. Character assassination? The third host laughed coldly. We're asking legitimate questions about your activism and your priorities. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. I can handle questions about my work, Pitt replied, his voice dangerously low. I can handle questions about my films, my humanitarian projects, my environmental advocacy. What I won't handle is you using my personal relationships to score cheap points. But the hosts had tasted blood, and they weren't backing down. The fifth host, who had been relatively quiet until now, decided to join the feeding frenzy. It's interesting that you're so defensive about this, Brad. If you were really as committed to these causes as you claim, wouldn't you want to discuss how your personal experiences shaped your activism? My personal experiences are none of your business, Pitt shot back. And the fact that you think you can use my divorce to attack my character shows exactly what kind of journalist you are. We're not journalists, the lead host said with a smirk. We're commentators. And we're commenting on the fact that you seem to have a problem with accountability. Accountability? Pitt's voice was incredulous. I'm here to talk about a documentary that I spent 3 years making about one of the most important issues facing our planet. I've donated millions of dollars to environmental causes. I've used my platform to raise awareness about climate change. And you want to talk about accountability? We want to talk about consistency, the fourth host interjected. You claim to care about the environment, but you've owned multiple private jets. You claim to care about social justice, but you've been silent on issues that matter to marginalized communities. You claim to be a humanitarian, but your ex-wife has done more actual humanitarian work than you have. Pitt stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's enough, he said, his voice barely controlled. "I came here in good faith to discuss important issues, and you've turned this into a personal attack." "Sit down, Brad," the lead host said dismissively. "We're not done here." "Yes, we are," Pitt replied, but he remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. "This isn't an interview. This is an ambush." "An ambush?" The second host laughed. "These are questions that any serious activist should be able to answer. The fact that you're getting so defensive suggests that maybe we're hitting a little too close to home." "You're not hitting close to home," Pitt said, his voice gaining strength. "You're manufacturing controversy where none exists. You're taking my words out of context and using my personal life to attack my professional work." "Your professional work?" The third host scoffed. "You mean your movies? Your vanity projects? Let's be real here, Brad. You're not an activist. You're an actor who occasionally writes checks to make himself feel better." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Pitt's jaw worked silently for a moment, and viewers could see him struggling with whether to respond or walk away. The hosts sensed they had pushed him to his breaking point, and they weren't about to let up. "You know what?" the fourth host continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "I think our audience deserves to hear the truth. They deserve to know that Hollywood's supposed environmentalist owns multiple houses, flies private jets, and lectures the rest of us about our carbon footprint." "I've offset my carbon footprint," Pitt replied through gritted teeth. "I've invested in renewable energy. I've built sustainable housing. I've done more for the environment than most people ever will." "But not as much as you could have," the fifth host added. "Not as much as someone with your resources and platform should have. You've done the minimum necessary to maintain your image while living a lifestyle that's completely at odds with your supposed values." "My supposed values?" Pitt's voice was rising again, his composure finally cracking completely. "You don't know anything about my values. You don't know what I've sacrificed for these causes. You don't know what I've given up." "What have you given up, Brad?" the lead host challenged. "Your privacy? Your comfort? Your wealth? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've managed to have your cake and eat it too." The accusation hit like a slap. Pitt's face flushed red, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually lose control completely. The studio audience was dead silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "You want to know what I've given up?" Pitt asked, his voice shaking with rage. "I've given up relationships. I've given up privacy. I've given up the ability to have normal conversations without people like you twisting my words and using them against me." "Oh, boo-hoo," the second host said mockingly. "The rich movie star has problems. Tell that to the people who are actually suffering from the issues you claim to care about." That was the final straw. Pitt's eyes blazed with fury, and he took a step toward the panel, his fists clenched. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled. "You sit here in your comfortable studio making six figures to tear down people who are actually trying to make a difference." The hosts exchanged glances, realizing they might have pushed too far, but it was too late to back down now. The damage was done, and the confrontation was about to reach its explosive climax. "Are you threatening us, Brad?" the lead host asked, trying to regain control of the situation, but her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty for the first time. "Threatening you?" Pitt laughed bitterly, running his hand through his hair. "I'm calling you out. There's a difference. You've spent the last 20 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on live television, and now you want to play the victim?" The fourth host, emboldened by what she perceived as backing down, decided to go for the jugular one final time. "We're not trying to destroy anything, Brad. We're trying to expose the hypocrisy of Hollywood elites who think they can lecture the American people while living in their ivory towers." "Ivory towers?" Pitt's voice was incredulous. "I grew up in Oklahoma. My father sold trucks. My mother was a school counselor. I worked construction jobs to pay for acting classes. Don't you dare talk to me about ivory towers when you sit here, making a living off manufactured outrage and celebrity gossip." The second host jumped in, her voice shrill with indignation. "Manufactured outrage? We're holding you accountable for your contradictions. That's journalism." "That's not journalism," Pitt shot back, his voice cutting through the studio like a knife. "Journalism would be asking me about the documentary I'm here to promote. Journalism would be discussing the environmental crisis that threatens our planet. What you're doing is character assassination disguised as moral superiority." The third host leaned forward aggressively. So now we're not real journalists? That's rich coming from someone whose biggest contribution to society is pretending to be other people for money. The insult landed like a physical blow, and something in Pitt's expression shifted. The anger was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, disgust and disappointment. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "You know what?" he said, straightening his jacket. "You're right about one thing. I do pretend to be other people for money. But at least when I'm acting, I'm honest about what I'm doing. I don't pretend that tearing people down on television makes me a crusader for justice." "We are crusaders for justice," the fifth host protested. "We're giving a voice to people who don't have platforms like yours." "You're giving a voice to your own egos," Pitt replied coldly. "You're not representing anyone but yourselves and your need to feel morally superior to the people you interview." The lead host's composure finally cracked completely. "How dare you come on our show and insult us? We've been fighting for progressive causes since before you even knew what activism was." "Fighting?" Pitt's voice rose to match hers. "You call this fighting? You call sitting in a climate-controlled studio attacking people who are actually trying to make a difference fighting? I've been to refugee camps. I've built houses with my own hands. I've put my money where my mouth is for decades. What have you done besides talk?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The hosts looked at each other, clearly not expecting to be put on the defensive. "We raise awareness," the second host said weakly. "You raise ratings," Pitt corrected sharply. "There's a difference. Awareness means educating people about issues and inspiring them to take action. What you do is create drama and controversy to keep people watching so you can sell more advertising." The fourth host tried to regain the offensive. "At least we're consistent in our message. We don't flip-flop depending on what's popular." "Flip-flop?" Pitt's laugh was harsh and bitter. "I've been fighting for environmental causes since before it was trendy. I've been involved in humanitarian work since I had the means to do it. The only thing that's changed is that I've learned to be more strategic about how I use my platform." "Strategic," the third host repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call staying silent when it matters most?" "I haven't stayed silent," Pitt replied, his patience completely exhausted. "I've spoken through my work. I've spoken through my actions. I've spoken through my charitable giving. Just because I don't tweet every thought that enters my head doesn't mean I'm silent." The fifth host made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "But social media is how you reach people today, Brad. That's how you create real change." "Real change?" Pitt's voice was filled with contempt. "Real change happens in the real world, not on Twitter. It happens when you actually do something, not when you post about it. It happens when you sacrifice something meaningful, not when you virtue signal to your followers." The lead host's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You're being incredibly condescending to our audience and to us." "I'm being honest," Pitt replied simply. "Something you clearly wouldn't recognize if it bit you in the face." The studio fell silent except for the sound of cameras still rolling. The hosts realized they had not only failed to destroy Pitt's reputation, but had managed to make themselves look petty and vindictive in the process. Pitt looked around the set one final time, his expression a mixture of disappointment and disgust. "You know what the real tragedy is here?" he said quietly. "We could have had a meaningful conversation about climate change. We could have discussed solutions to environmental degradation. We could have inspired people to take action. Instead, you chose to turn this into a personal attack because that's easier than actually engaging with difficult issues." He began unhooking his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. "I came here to talk about a documentary that took 3 years of my life to make. A film about one of the most important issues facing humanity. But you're more interested in tabloid gossip and manufactured controversy than you are in actual journalism." The second host made one final, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Brad, we're just trying to have an honest conversation about your role in Honest." Pitt interrupted, dropping his microphone onto the chair. "There's nothing honest about what just happened here. You ambushed me with personal attacks, twisted my words, and tried to use my private life to score political points. That's not honest conversation. That's character assassination." He started walking toward the exit, then stopped and turned back to face the panel one final time. "You want to know the difference between real activism and what you do here? Real activism requires sacrifice. It requires putting yourself on the line for something bigger than yourself. What you do here is safe. You get to feel righteous without actually risking anything." The lead host, her voice now desperate, called out as he walked away. So that's it. You're just going to walk away when things get challenging. Pitt paused at the edge of the set and looked back with her expression of complete disdain. I'm walking away from people who are more interested in destruction than construction, more interested in tearing down than building up, more interested in their own egos than the causes they claim to represent. With that final devastating assessment, Brad Pitt walked off the View set, leaving the five hosts sitting in stunned silence as the cameras continued to roll. The studio audience, which had been dead quiet throughout the explosive confrontation, began to murmur and whisper among themselves. The lead host, clearly rattled, tried to regain some semblance of control. Well, she said, her voice shaky, I guess we'll be right back after this commercial break. But the damage was done. In trying to destroy Brad Pitt's reputation, the View's hosts had instead exposed their own petty vindictiveness and manufactured outrage. They had turned what should have been an important discussion about environmental issues into a personal attack that backfired spectacularly. As the cameras finally stopped rolling and the studio lights dimmed, it was clear that this confrontation would be remembered not as a victory for progressive journalism, but as an example of what happens when television personalities prioritize ratings over responsibility, drama over discourse, and personal attacks over meaningful conversation. The View had succeeded in creating viral content, but at the cost of their credibility and Brad Pitt's respect. In the end, the only thing they had accomplished was proving his point about the difference between real activism and performative outrage.